Welcome to Ecology Matters, a podcast from the Ecological Society of Australia, featuring ecologists from all over the country.
The biodiversity in this part of the world is just incredible.
It's not just ice and snow, it's teeming with life on the coast.
I see that and I say, okay, well, that's a great opportunity to study it more.
Looking at those sites gives you a sense of joy and hope.
Love being orange, it's incredible.
It's just, it's a really awesome program, and it's just so healing, like, for our whole community.
It's the beauty of ecology, is that it's so interconnected.
Yeah, it's been really exciting, actually.
When you think of Antarctica, do you imagine patches of green? Moss beds so dense they support their own microecosystems? Probably not, and you're not alone. Georgia Watson joined Ecology Matters to share her work on these important and largely unknown sentinels of Antarctica. She also came to explain why actually talking about them and about Antarctica more generally is so important. I read that your master's thesis was on forest ecology and disturbance by fire and logging. Now, obviously, you're looking at Antarctic mosses. How did you go from looking at forest ecology to working on Antarctic mosses?
Yeah, it was so it was my honours thesis that I did forest ecology work, and that was with Professor Kris at the University of Wollongong. So I was doing that work with honours. I did a couple of research assistant gigs with Kris afterwards, and that sort of ranged from native flora biology, arid zone mammal and reptile trapping, some more tree work, but sort of a little bit all over the place. And what happened was I was doing some demonstrating work as well, very, straight out of uni, doing a couple of casual gigs across the uni. What I did was apply for a job in a interdisciplinary funding program within UAW, and I got that job, which was in a program called Global Challenges as a research support officer. And I was on the theme of sustaining coastal and marine zones, so jumping around all over the place. And my boss in that role was distinguished Professor Sharon Robinson, who is an Antarctic moss specialist. And when the pandemic hit, there was no funding to distribute through a funding program. So I sideways stepped with Sharon into Antarctic research. And I've been working in the Antarctic space for about 2 years now. I just fell in love with it, and I happen to have the skills for remote field work, having done that arid zone work out in the far New South Wales, the corner country, and then I'd done a bit of volunteering in rainforests in Indonesia, doing some forest work there. So yeah, I had the skills for remote field work, and this was the most remote that I've ever done, going to Antarctica. But yeah, it was just sort of luck and saying yes to the right opportunities as they came up.
And as you mentioned there, you did go to Antarctica in February 2022. What exactly were you doing in Antarctica?
So I was collecting moss samples. Sharon Robinson has been going to the same sites, some permanent monitoring sites in Antarctica around Casey Station. She set up a long-term monitoring program in the early 2000s, so we've got about 20 years of data now. And we visit the same moss beds, we collect samples in the same quadrats that we revisit every couple of years. And we take those samples, have a look at the species composition, because there's only 3 species that we know of down there. They have different niches, so we can tell how the environment's changing in terms of its hydrology based on if we see more of the water-loving species or more of the dry condition-loving species there. And we also take pictures because mosses can change colour from green to red to grey depending on how stressed they are. And so we take photos, we take samples, and I've been analysing those in the lab now, looking at the species composition. And it was just the most incredible time. We had just over 500 samples collected in 3 weeks. We had a couple of blizzard days, which took us out for a little while, but it was just absolutely beautiful scenery down there, and very easy to get distracted just staring out at the the sun sparkling on the ocean down there. It's really beautiful.
I can imagine. And you mentioned that you have hundreds of images that you brought back with you. What have you discovered in the time since you returned? What have those images revealed to you?
So we're still processing the images, and we actually were really lucky to get a second season. We had some scientists go down this February as well, which is quite rare that we would get 2 seasons in a row. We're meant to be going down once every 5 years, and it had been 8 years before I had gone down since the last time scientists in our team were able to go. So we're looking at both of those and sort of figuring out which ones are best. We had a particularly snowy year when I was there in February of 22. So some of our photos aren't the best quality. We're really lucky to have 2023 scientists to go back and collect some more images as well. But what we know is that with extra snow in February, it's out of season. And after we left in March of 2022, there was a heat wave, an Antarctic heat wave down near Casey Station. And so we're really interested to see if there's differences between 22 and 23, as well as looking at the long-term data compared to the 2000s.
Your time in Casey obviously fueled your enthusiasm for Antarctica because you took a flight over Antarctica on New Year's Eve. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So this New Year's Eve just gone, I was able to fly over Antarctica. We flew over the Ross Sea and some of the New Zealand and Korean bases. And that was with the Antarctic Science Foundation as an ambassador. And I was able to take on that role through some other science communication I was doing. I had an art exhibition last year with a lot of brilliant people here at the University of Wollongong. We put together a science art exhibition. We had colleagues from the art faculty, the science faculty working together. We had scientists putting in artworks. We had artists talking about science and science fiction as well. So from that exhibition, I was able to take on the role as an ambassador and go on that flight. And really my role on the flight was to walk around the cabin talking to the passengers. It was obviously a tourist experience for a lot of people, but my goal was to make it an educational experience as well, so that people would walk away from that flight being able to advocate for Antarctica and know that there are really great scientists working in that space, and that it's worthy of protection and needs people to speak up on its behalf.
Studying mosses seems an inherently very macro exercise, so you get very close to your subject matter. Taking a flight over Antarctica and using that as an education tool, it must have shown you the other side of Antarctica, just how big the continent is. How has that experience, taking that flight, impacted your understanding of Antarctica and changed your approach to your work, if at all?
That's a really good question. I think I'm so obviously so fortunate to have been able to be there on the ground. I think being in the air reinforced some of the ideas that I had about Antarctica before I went, which is that it's vast and beautiful and white and blue and it's quite stark in a way, in that it's so much of the same thing, in that you can see crevices in the snowfields and you can see the mountain ranges, but having the in-person experience on the ground, knowing that it's full of colour, the moss beds are so lush and beautiful and green, the lichens are bright and colourful, and penguins come up and just look over your shoulder and squawk at you while you're in the field collecting samples. Having that in-person experience and being able to relate what people on the plane were seeing, it's not just this empty space, it's not just ice and snow, it's teeming with life on the coast, and being able to present that aspect of Antarctica to people, it really helped connect, I think, with, instead of just viewing it out a window, which you could almost watch it on a documentary in that way, being able to connect to the life in Antarctica, it really brought me a lot of joy to see people sort of understand what it's like down there.
And I understand you have another exciting project on the horizon in terms of the Homeward Bound 8 program. You've been selected as one of the participants. Can you tell me a little bit about that program, and what do you think that you'll get out of this program?
I am just blown away having been accepted into the Homeward Bound program. It's something I've really looked up to the people who've been through in previous cohorts. I really admire them. I see a lot of people in my circle who've been involved as mentors, and to be able to be involved, it just makes me so happy. So Homeward Bound is a leadership training program for women with a background in STEM. I obviously come from the science background, but there's so many different fields represented in my cohort. There's 116 people from 25 countries, so we're going to have just such a broad range of perspectives represented in our group. We're kicking off in May, so I'm really excited. I've been fundraising for my spot in the program as well, and that's been a really great experience to talk to people about it. And the overall goal of Homeward Bound is to get women into positions of leadership, into rooms of power, with a support network as well of having other people to rely on and be mentors, so that we can influence decisions around climate action, sustainability, and really provide a different model of leadership, one that's more kind rather than cutthroat, because that model hasn't been serving us or the planet so far. So it's definitely a change that we need.
The program will culminate in a visit to Antarctica at the end of 2024.
Yeah.
That's exciting to go back.
It is. And so that would be on the peninsula, on the west of Antarctica, whereas I've been doing research on the east. And that would be travelling to Antarctica via ship. So it's another method. It definitely has its costs associated with it in terms of travelling so far across the world. But I really think it's important to get together, to meet people in person, and to have that 3-week-long leadership intensive camp, essentially, and really be able to make a difference for the planet at the other side of that.
And will you have a chance to continue your moss research in that different part of Antarctica?
I'm not too sure. I'll definitely take a lot of photos. We do have some colleagues here at the University of Wollongong who do research in that part of the world. Essentially what I'll be doing will be on a tourist vessel. So I'll definitely be abiding by the rules and guidelines of Antarctic tourism in that way, and not taking any samples. I'm not allowed to. But yes, I'm so excited to see the moss beds over there. They're bigger and so much more diverse on the west. So I'm really excited to see them.
Your supervisor, Professor Sharon Robinson, has been visiting Antarctica for 20 years now, hasn't she? Over 20 years.
Yeah.
Do you hope that your relationship with Antarctica will continue just as long? And what do you imagine the continent may look like in another 20 years?
That's a really great question. I would love to continue my relationship with Antarctica, continue working and advocating for its protection, because Antarctica is our air conditioner in the world, and we see recent research that's come out that it influences our air currents, it influences our ocean currents. So I can see myself definitely advocating for Antarctic protection and climate action for the rest of my life.
Ecology Matters is a podcast by the Ecological Society of Australia, a not-for-profit organisation supporting ecologists and ecological science in Australia. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. To learn more about our work, follow us on social media, visit our website or sign up to our newsletter. You can find links to these in the show notes. The theme music is Glow by Scott Buckley. Lastly, thank you to all the ecologists who have taken part in this series and shared their perspectives on why ecology matters.